There's another logical fallacy that could be involved in the defense of global lockdowns that is not as commonly utilized. So it didn't make the top 10 list of lockdown fallacies. But it's worth mentioning because some people will cling to this and think that they're on the right side, that they're being rational and ethical when in fact they're not. So the name of this logical fallacy is two wrongs make a right. And it's a fallacy because two wrongs don't make a right. So an example of this would be um, someone steals your bicycle and then you decide to steal someone else's bicycle, right? Just some other random person. You see a bicycle that isn't locked up one day and you're like, huh, well, they did it to me. They being just humanity. I'll do it to them. And you just grab the bike and think, oh, well, you rationalize it or legitimize it, thinking somehow two wrongs make a right. So many other examples could be given. Um, One unfortunate example is with parenting, where if you were badly abused as a child by your parents, when you become a parent yourself, you might then abuse your child and rationalize it in your mind, saying, oh, well, I had to go through this, so you're going to have to go through it too. And just to be clear on that front, I'm not saying all disciplining of a child is abusive. Definitely not. If you just let a child do whatever they want, if you let them run the show and be a leader, it's not going to be beneficial to you or them. You do need to take the role of leader and protector and guide, which could involve some harsh discipline that isn't abusive. But to return to the context of lockdowns, some folks might admit that to prescribe preventative healthcare mandates is a form of abuse. They might admit, well, that's true because if one neighbor were to do that to another neighbor, it would be called abusive. But they think it's somehow different when the state does it because the state is, this all knowing, superior group of people that have, the best information, the best scientists, and, they're just basically wise angels that we should all just give our lives over to, which is, of course, is the appeal to authority fallacy. It's idolatry. So it's kind of, you have to have more than one fallacy in your mind at a time to go along with this nonsense. So they might admit, okay, yeah, the medical mandates are a bit aggressive. And you might hear someone say something along the lines of, well, sometimes you gotta take control of the situation. Sometimes you gotta be a bit rough, kind of paralleling the parental um, scenario, which I mentioned. They might kind of equate it with like, well, sometimes you gotta be kind of controlling to your children, otherwise they just run amok. But that's a weak analogy, another fallacy, because first of all, the state isn't our parents and we're not children, right? We're talking about adults here. We're talking about, adults that are put under the category of citizen and then adults that are put under the category of official. It's not the same as a parent and a child. So if you're projecting the parent to child dynamic to, on top of government to citizen, That's a weak analogy, and it's just incorrect, right? You're just basically considering um, the government be the parents of grown men and women. It's not. If you do think that, well, it's not a correct. It's not an ethical view, right? You're basically saying that whoever is a government employee is a superior in intelligence and wisdom and ethics, and therefore any other adult needs to just submit to whatever demands that they come up with, right? So getting back to two wrongs don't make a right. So they'll look at the crisis itself as a wrong, right? They might say, "Oh, well, it's not quite the same as straightforward as, oh, well, someone stole my bike, so I'm going to steal someone else's bike." But it really is the same dynamic, and I hope to make that clear here. It's the same dynamic because you're looking at people being harmed by an illness, right? And you're saying, okay, that's a wrong going on in the world. And so the solution to that wrong is to intervene with abusive control, right? Curfews, lockdowns, distancing, restrictions on travel, etc., right? Treating people like livestock. That's how we handle the situation, right? That's that like kind of tough guy, you know, perspective where it's like, you know, these hippies don't understand, these naive whatever armchair philosophers, or they'll think like they understand the real world, right? Like they know the dark side of reality. They understand that sometimes you gotta be abusive in order to keep keep society in check, keep it from descending into, utter chaos, right? I get the perspective, right? Like I'm not unable to put myself in those shoes, right? I get that perspective. It's just that I recognize that it's irrational and unethical, right? You're saying, well, because there's a health crisis, it's then legitimate to coerce the entire population to take experimental pharmaceutical drugs and put devices on their face and their children's face and track and tag them and, like I said, treat them like livestock. Like, if that's your thought process, you're assuming that the people doing the testing and the tracking, etc., and the pharmaceutical, cocktail formulations, that they're all perfect beings, right? They're not mistaken in any way. You're totally ignoring the fact that many people have been dying within like 48 hours of taking the vaccine, right? Adverse, that's the extreme end of the adverse reactions. And then all these other cases of other serious adverse reactions, right? You're just ignoring all that, right? That's just collateral damage, right? Because if in your mind it theoretically serves the greater good, then it's legit, right? That doesn't hold up to scrutiny. You're advocating abuse, you're condoning abuse as a solution to a crisis. And if you just look at it at that fundamental level with some critical thinking, some critical analysis, you can recognize that doesn't hold up. It isn't as wise as you might have first thought it was. Because abuse doesn't actually improve any situation. And giving the state the power to make medical decisions for you and your family and your children and your children's children forever, that's not a safe position for society. You didn't improve society that way. That is not for the greater good. You've made society a lot less safe, right? Basically, if you don't have idol worshiping going on, if you don't idolize the state, if you don't consider them a superior class of humans that are flawless and never mistaken and never deceive, and you recognize political history, which is just filled with atrocities like democide, if you just have that basic, clear-headed view where you're not putting them on a pedestal, then none of this can be seen as for the greater good, because it's all based on the assumption that their intervention is totally reasonable, totally effective. But on a deeper ethical level, you can discover that our reality, creation, is made in such a way by a good creator where an evil doesn't actually do any good, and abuse is an evil. So God didn't make a world in which abuse is sometimes good. It just makes matters worse. If there's a health crisis and you add abuse to it, you just made it worse, right? You added the wrong, you could say, of a crisis, even though it's not equivalent to a wrong like someone stealing a bicycle and you stealing someone else's bicycle. So, the reasoning is flawed in multiple respects. First, you're basically accusing someone of a wrong that they haven't even done yet. You're saying you could potentially get someone else sick, and so I can abuse you with this medical tyranny. So it's a preemptive attack on something that hasn't even happened yet. This person hasn't actually harmed anyone, but you're treating them as if they already have. So, you're kind of following this two wrongs make a right perspective, which is flawed in and of itself. Even if that person did do something wrong, it wouldn't be justifiable to abuse them as well. Using defensive force is justifiable. If someone is out there hurting people, swinging a sword around, hurting people, yeah, of course. Using force to stop them doing that is totally legitimate, because that's not abusive to do so. You're stopping abuse. But a preemptive attack is just abusing someone because you think that they might hurt someone, right? Like you think they might get sick, and you think that if they do get sick, they might then transmit that to someone else, and then that other person might get really sick and might possibly die, right? It's all theoretical. So preemptive attack is not legitimate. Two wrongs making a right is not legitimate. Appealing to authority is not reasonable, it's not rational. Just because you think someone's the expert, that doesn't matter. They don't have the right to abuse. Someone could be a legitimate expert. I gave the example before of I could give tons of scientific evidence that vitamin C is actually really good for your immune system and would be really good to help counter an illness like a flu-like illness, right? I can give tons of scientific evidence. I could say this is just solid proof. Vitamin C, I could say vitamin D as well. But even if I have all the best scientists backing me, that doesn't give me the right to force people to take vitamin C and vitamin D. It doesn't give me the right to say, you can't get on an airplane and travel anymore unless you take vitamin C and vitamin D. Unless I see you ingest these tablets, or unless you let me inject it into you. Right? Because I'm not their master. Right? I recognize God is the authority. God is the creator. I'm not the creator of other human beings. I'm not their master. I don't have the right to rule over them. As long as they're not being abusive, I don't have the right to use any kind of force on them. And I can't just theorize that they might harm someone and say, well, you might get someone sick, and so in the name of safety, I can be abusive. No. No, that doesn't hold up. Preemptive attack is not legitimate. I can't harm someone because I think they might harm someone, or I just say they might harm someone. Again, recognize that deception can be a possibility. Someone could just say that they think someone's going to be harmful, when in fact they just want to control them or get them out of the picture, whatever, right? They label them dangerous, lock them up, right? That's what communists have done, you know, all around the world for, centuries, right? Decades after decade, labeling groups as dangerous, right? But meanwhile, they weren't, the only danger they were to the ruling party, right? Political prisoners, right? POWs, right? You could have some super violent dictator or ruling class going around, rounding people up and putting them in prison or just killing them because they label them dangerous. They say, well, so basically it's just an extreme version of preemptive attack. They're saying, well, we're going to take out these people now before they cause any trouble, right? It's not legitimate. You can't accept that as a premise, because if you do, you're just condoning endless chaotic abuse in the world. That's not an upgrade for society. You're just letting rulers abuse people whenever they get an inkling or suspicion that someone is possibly dangerous or possibly a threat in some way, whether that's, a threat health-wise or a threat politically or whatever. Same goes for gun control. Oh, well, we don't think regular people should have weapons of war, right? It's like that was the whole purpose of the Second Amendment, was to have an equal playing field so that the government couldn't take over the population, and treat them like slaves, right? To keep the government in check so that it wouldn't become another tyrannical regime. That was the whole point of the Second Amendment. And people are like, oh, well, it's not legitimate to have a weapon of war. It's like, that was the whole point, is to have, for everybody to have basically the same weapon, so you're on the same playing field, right? That's why they say if you go to a gun show, that's where the friendliest people you'll ever meet will be, because everyone's on the same playing field, right? Same with like the Old West. Most people were on the same playing field. They all had revolvers, right? No one was able to really dominate anyone else because they all could keep each other in check, right? Basic common sense here that gets lost in all the propaganda. But again, just to conclude here, two wrongs don't make a right, especially when the wrong is something you're hypothesizing someone might commit. Doesn't then give you the right to abuse them. You don't then get legitimate, rulership over them. Why do you think you have that right? If you think you can do that, then why couldn't anyone else do that? You just have everyone abusing each other all over the place and saying the whole time, well, it's for safety, it's for the greater good, it's for safety, right? It would just be a chaotic, insane society, which is what we're progressing into, this dystopia. But meanwhile, it's all being ushered in, under the name of science and reason and, sound ethics. It's the complete opposite. All right, thanks for listening.